First and foremost, thank you guys so much for watching. This is the first part in the series on our latest build. This is our 2015 Honda Grom. We got this a couple of months ago at an insurance auction. It was labeled as having side damage as well as a salvage title. We're not too worried about that, so I'm just going to give you a quick overview of how the bike sits right now, and then we're going to jump into what our plans are for the bike and show you guys our donor/parts bike. So this is a 2015 Honda Grom. Like I said before, it's got a salvage title and it was labeled as side damage. However, we do not think that's actually why it is a salvage title. When we got it, you could clearly see that somebody had tampered with the ignition key as well as the gas cap, and the side cover here was completely missing with that lock for underneath the seat. So what we think happened was it was a theft recovery, and that was why it was a salvage title. It just so happened that the exhaust was kind of broken and shifted over to the side, so we just re-welded that bracket, and then it's kind of got some general damage here and there. It's definitely seen the ground a couple times. So the previous owner was obviously a stunt rider. It already had the stunt cage on it, and this exhaust is pretty banged up, dented up. Not a big deal because we're going to be changing that with what we're doing, but it has some road rash on the rear caliper, on the swing arm. It has some road rash on these front spools, and then before we changed it, it had the end bars were pretty well eaten up. So in addition to already having the stunt cage and the aftermarket exhaust, this bike came to us with this aftermarket seat. It has this rear taillight / integrated blinker unit back here, and it had these Pro Taper handlebars on it. When we looked these up, these are actually for a pit bike. These aren't even for a motorcycle. So they work. We'll probably end up changing these a little bit later, but we're not going to worry about that right now. So that's kind of what the bike had on it when we bought it. And since then, we have done a few things. We put new grips on it. We put these end bars and these levers, since those were all kind of rashed up before. Just want to clean it up while we rode it. And we did this 3-row LED light bar, which is super awesome, super bright, with the integrated turn signals down here. And we did a Chimera intake with this Canon air filter. Kind of hard to see back there, but it's down there. So that kind of got rid of the big air box, which took up a lot of room. And then we just did a license plate bracket back here to kind of obviously mount our license plate. Now that we've had the bike for a few months, we've definitely been able to get a feel for the bike in general and how it rides and kind of the nature of how it handles. It is definitely the smallest and most underpowered bike that we've had, but by far it is the most fun to just kind of whip around. I'll ride this thing to work. We ride it around on just kind of rides that we go on, and it is a blast to ride off-road even. We'll kind of take it out when we take the other motorcycles and the quads out. We live on a kind of a dirt road. We have to get in a neighborhood, so we'll take it to go get the mail, and it's just a blast to ride around. It currently has, let's see if we can see that, 6,665. Kind of an unlucky number, so we'll see how this video goes, but it's got pretty, average miles for the year. It's a 2015, so it's been ridden, but it generally has nothing wrong with it. It rides great for what it is. It's got the exhaust, it's got the intake, so not sure how much power it really adds, but after all, it's still only about 8 horsepower. So definitely a little underwhelming for somebody coming from sport bikes, sport touring bikes that have a lot more oomph to them. So that kind of leads us to this project and why we decided to go this route in the first place. We wanted a cheap bike, and we just wanted to do something different. We wanted a bike that was going to be different but fun all at the same time. We wanted to do something that nobody has done before, and we just thought that this Grom was the perfect candidate. When I bought this bike, I was not actually planning on buying it. I was looking at a couple other bikes at auction, and then this came across the board, and it was just so cheap, I had to buy it. So I didn't actually know what I was getting into until we went and picked it up. Before I picked this bike up, I had never even seen a Grom in person. I had never even sat on one, and then I just kind of, I guess it sounds cheesy to say, but kind of fell in love with it after we picked it up. It was just like super rad to have a bike this small, that's street legal, just easy to get around in, and it's overall a really great bike. Just the power is absolutely awful. It's got 8 horsepower, 8 foot-pounds of torque, and you can't ride faster than 55, 60 miles an hour max downhill. I've ridden this bike to 72 miles per hour on a huge downhill, probably with the tailwind, and I think that's what the stock ECU like speed governor is, around 72, 73 miles an hour. So that's obviously what it's going to do no matter what, unless you start getting into the crazy engine mods, bigger bore kits, 4-valve heads, stuff like that, which even still, you're modding a 125cc engine, and you can dump thousands of dollars into this bike and into this engine platform just for mild results. So instead of taking that $1,500 that I would have put into this motor to try to speed it up a little bit, this little 125cc engine, we went with this. This is the new heart of that bike. Yes, this is an FZ07, and we are taking this engine and putting it into that tiny bike. So instead of spending all this money on a little 125cc engine, we bought this mangled mess. This is a 2017 Yamaha FZ07. It's a 700cc, well 698 if you're trying to be official, but everybody considers it 700cc. It's a parallel twin. It's got huge amounts of torque, pretty decent horsepower numbers, and we are stuffing that engine into our Grom. Yeah, we might be crazy, but we wanted to do something that was totally new. We didn't want to do something that everybody's done, like a 300 swap. Plenty of people do those, and we just wanted more power. We wanted more than 8 horsepower. We wanted more than the 13 or 14 horsepower that a single 300 swap does. Kind of our thought process with this swap, we bought the Grom, noticed and definitely agreed that it needed more power. So we're thinking about it like, hey, let's look into doing a 250 swap. Then I looked into the 300 swap. And if you're going through that much trouble to do an engine swap, I was looking at the 450 swaps out of like a dirt bike, kind of that route. Then I was looking at the CBR 500 engines. And once you kind of step up to the 500, that's the parallel twin category in that kind of in that realm. So the engines are going to be a little bit wider. You're going to have a little bit more weight to play with and deal with, and that's kind of where at that point it's like, hey, well, the 700 really isn't that much bigger. So we measured Paul's bike and we just went for it. So we pulled the trigger on this bike, which is also another auction bike, and here we are. Rough shape is definitely an understatement for this bike. It was wrecked, and it was wrecked hard. This is a salvage title, and we completely understand why. Before you guys ask, we don't know how we wrecked. We don't know what happened. We just saw the bike at the auction website, bid on it, and went to pick it up. So that's as far as we know. We bought this bike sight unseen, pretty much, besides the stock pictures that were on the auction website. And so we kind of took a gamble. We took a chance. But all we needed was the complete engine. We needed the wire harness, the ECU, and that's pretty much it. We're going to be building a frame pretty much from scrap. We didn't need the exhaust. We didn't need the swing arm. We didn't need any of that stuff. All we needed was a good engine and the wiring for it. And this pretty much fit the bill for what we needed. The engine is in actually really great shape. It has a couple small scrapes right here and a little ding right here, but otherwise this engine didn't touch the ground on the left side. And moving over to the right side, again, it's only got some light road rash here that will easily be able to stand out, and then when we get these cases powder coated again, you won't even be able to tell. It's got, so these are the coolant tubes from the water pump. These are bent a little bit, but that is a cheap part to replace, and it's external and superficial, not going to be a big deal whatsoever. So the engine is in great shape. It's not even leaking any oil. I've checked the oil on it, and it's at a great level as it is, and we haven't touched it. So I'm going to assume that obviously, well, it had to be, the engine had to have been running for the guy to wreck into something. So it was running when he quit. There's no cracks in the cases. Everything's looking good. It's just kind of everything around the engine that is just completely mangled. And it's for us, it is what it is. We're just gonna be taking everything apart and taking just what we need for this bike. Doing a quick damage assessment on this bike, But like we said before, it's really not going to matter much because all we're using is the engine. But pretty much everything is toast. We did get the front wheel along with the bike, but that's pretty bad and bent up, and everything's gone on that. The brake rotors might be usable, and the front brake calipers, which I don't think they're even going to fit in these 12-inch wheels for the Grom, but if we can figure something out to use those, that would be cool, because they're way better than the single disc on this bike. But that might be the only thing usable off of the front fork assembly. The forks were completely broken in half. One spring's hanging out there, the other spring is hanging out on the other side of the forks on the front assembly, I guess you could call it. Handlebars are obviously toast. The one bummer that we kind of discovered is that in the pictures on the auction site, the dash assembly was still hanging here, which plugs in here actually, and when we went to pick it up, it was completely gone. So we kind of got bummed out there, which means we have to buy another dash off online, probably going to be eBay or wherever we can find one cheap enough to replace that, just because we're going to be running the entire electrical system off of this bike on that bike. So we're going to be putting the FZ07 dash up there. So that was the one big bummer. And then there's one other questionable thing that we might be using, is that the ECU is right on the side here, and there is a crack in the case. Like, we have not obviously taken any of this apart yet, so we haven't been able to look at anything, but this plug got a little munched in here, and then this case is cracked. So we will see if that is even usable. The rear wheel on this bike is actually in pretty decent shape, so that might be one of the few things that we can take off and sell to recoup some of our money in buying this bike in the first place. But other than that, there really isn't a whole lot that we're going to be able to kind of salvage. So that's kind of an overview of what we're working with this bike and what we started with this bike. Now, as for our plan, we need to first start tearing this bike down. So we're going to tear this bike down completely to just a bare engine. We're going to strip everything off. We're going to strip the wire harness bare, just to bare wires. That's it. We're going to label everything as well as we can, take off what sensors that we might need, and then we'll pretty much get rid of this entire thing. The frame, it's probably garbage. I'll have to take some measurements and see if the front neck is bent. The frame might actually be salvageable if somebody wanted to buy that with a salvage title. So that, and pretty much the rear wheel and possibly the swing arm are the only usable parts. Everything else is just going to go in the garbage, not even worth keeping. So once we have this bike torn all the way down to a bare engine, we will then start taking apart this bike. This bike has, like we said, not much wrong with it, so a lot of these parts are going to be good to sell. This engine is perfectly good. We're going to be able to sell the ECU, the front dash. As far as the frame goes, this is probably going to be a full custom frame to be able to support a much bigger engine, as well as trying to put this power to the ground. It's going to be so the stock Grom's about 8 horsepower. We're figuring once we're done with the FZ07, we'll be around 85 horsepower with a full exhaust, power commander, intake, all that kind of the basic mods and like custom tuning. So that's 10 times the power. So we're gonna have to beefing up the suspension and the frame on this bike. We don't know if we're gonna have to do a custom swing arm or not. I'm still trying to figure out if this little axle is gonna be able to take that much power, as well as speed. This Grom tops out about 60 miles an hour with me on it. I weigh about 150 pounds, and with that engine, at least in a stock FZ07, you can easily get to 130-ish, depending on your gearing, 130 to 150. So again, gearing's going to play a big role in this, but this bike is going to have to handle a lot more torque and a lot more horsepower, and along with that, more speed. So we have to try to kind of reinforce the frame and the swing arm. The frame's probably just going to be us cutting the neck off right here, building a custom tube frame across the back or across the bottom, and because that parallel twin is so much taller, it's going to come from here all the way up to here pretty much. So in terms of fuel tank, we're not going to have much of a fuel tank up here. We're actually going to have to build a custom fuel cell that kind of saddles over the engine and into this area. The stock fuel tank on the Grom is like less than 1.5 gallons. and that would get pretty much nowhere with the 700 anyways. So, and expanding the fuel tank was going to be a must from the beginning for this build. But because that engine is so much taller and it's not flat like the horizontal 125, we're just going to have to do a custom tank that's pretty much lives in this area here. It's really going to depend on the intake of the FC07 engine. So our intake is right here. This is the big intake box. I found a couple parts that I might be able to squeeze in here. So on the Grom, if you can imagine it, our fuel tank sits right here in stock position. I'd like to use the same fuel filler cap and just have a tube and a custom flat tank that comes and fills this area here. Instead of going up, we're going to go back. So that's kind of the plan, the basic gist of what we're doing. So it's going to be a custom frame on this guy that goes around the top, around the bottom, and then we might have to do a custom swing arm in terms of support, like a tubular style with some beefier materials. I would really like to keep this Grom looking like a Grom as much as possible. So that means using all the OEM fairings. I'd like to use the same seat, the same rear fairings, and I'd like to keep it the same wheelbase. It's absolutely going to be a wheelie monster, especially with 12-inch freaking wheels and 80 plus foot-pounds of torque. I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head right now. It's been a little while, but it's going to have a huge amount of power, and we might have to end up extending the swing arm just to keep it rideable. And then it's going to be a lot of suspension tuning just to try to get this bike to handle like a Grom does as it is. A lot of people, we've kind of been talking back and forth with some guys online and on the forums, and some people were really concerned about the weight difference with this engine and that engine. I only weigh 150 pounds. That engine weighs about 50 to 60 pounds more than that assembly. And so you have guys that are 200 plus pounds riding these bikes all the time with no problems. So me adding 60 pounds on top of this engine shouldn't really make much of a difference, besides that it's going to have a little bit more weight up top. So I'm really curious how the weight is going to be distributed inside this frame once we get it done, and how kind of its behavioral characteristics are on the street. So kind of all in all, that is what we're working with. That's our general plan. We are super excited to get going on this bike. We've had them for about a month now. We've just been super busy with other projects around the house. So we are definitely ready to get this thing torn down. We're ready to tear this bike down, and we want to start getting some progress. If this is something that you guys want to see more of, definitely like this video and subscribe to our channel. We're going to be doing our best to start the teardown of this bike as soon as possible. So we're going to be putting more videos out more frequently now. And one thing that really means a lot to us is getting some of those numbers up and really seeing if you guys are interested in us even doing this. We want to know your guys' feedback. We want to know what you guys' thoughts are. We want to know what suggestions you may have, what you like, what you don't like, all that kind of stuff. So leave a comment, like, subscribe, and we're going to be getting on this thing now.